Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Common Council of the City of Huntington on June 10th, 2025. Prior to the business meeting this evening, we'll have an invocation led by myself, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by Christy McElhenney. Those who wish to participate may rise at this time. Please bow with me. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day and the blessing it is to gather together and serve our neighbors in this community. And Lord, we pray that your Holy Spirit would guide and direct our actions and our words, grant us wisdom and discernment as we weigh important matters for our city and our neighbors. And Lord, we pray for Heritage Days and the parade and the carnival and all the festivities this week, that we would have a safe and fun time together celebrating what it means to be neighbors in a community. We give you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And with that, then, we will call the business meeting to order, beginning with a roll call. Christy?
Brodigan.
Present.
Chapman.
Present.
Felton.
Present.
Funk. Johnson.
Here.
Pike is absent. Rensberger.
Present.
Thank you. And having established a quorum for the conducting of city business, then we'll move along to consideration of the minutes of the May 27th meeting. Is there a motion to bring those to the floor for consideration and adoption?
So moved.
A motion and second regarding the minutes. Further discussion and consideration by council members. Not seeing or hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of the minutes as submitted. Christy?
Chapman.
Yes.
Felton.
Yes.
Funk. Johnson.
Yes.
Rensberger.
Yes.
Brodigan.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving along to reports from committees, boards, or commissions. Charlie?
I have nothing this evening, thank you.
Dwight?
Just a brief report. The Lime City Economic Development group met at the end of May. We met out at River Forks West, and actually our main focus was the development that's happened out there and the installation of the new signs, drawing attention to it and the future that looks pretty bright.
Thank you. Any questions for Dwight? BJ?
Yeah, solid waste met Monday. I dropped off papers to everybody here. We have started to keep track of everyone that drops off at the West Park Drive location. For the month of May, there was a total of 2,345 drop-offs just at the West Park Drive location. Scott's hazardous material recycling out at the old landfill. The month of May, he had a total of 234 drop-offs. And GFL gives us numbers every month on the amount collected. And so far this year, just in Huntington County, we've gotten 241 tons of recyclables to GFL from our 4 recycling locations through solid waste.
Any questions for PJ and solid waste? Todd?
Huntington County Economic Development, we have completed 7 projects year to date, totaling over 24 million in investments. The 18-year impact, the agency has now facilitated 197 projects, nearly 845 million during Mark's tenure at the agency. Charitable gift income is on track to meet budget goals. And we got a presentation this morning on a couple of things that they're doing is when we're trying to get new businesses to come in town, they ask us what our electrical capacity is and what our water capacity is. So if they use a lot of electricity or water, then they know we can fit their needs. So we just had an electric study done, so we know about how much electricity we have on spare to hold, so we can tell a business that uses a bunch of electricity that we can. I think we have 30% open.
35 megawatts.
Yeah. So we got 30 what?
35 megawatts.
Yeah, megawatts. I don't know the terminology, so. Mark's here, and he'll tell you more of that stuff.
Plenty of capacity is the...
We got capacity for new people to come in, so bring them on in. Yeah, exactly. So, thank you. That's it.
Any questions for Todd? Thank you. Andrew?
Nothing significant of note, but the redevelopment committee has a couple of infrastructure projects like Market Street, and also going to probably wrap up Tipton Street pretty quickly as well. And then finally, it looks like we're on track to start possibly looking for bids for the tear down of the HK Porter project here soon. So that should probably be on track to be done this year as well.
Any follow-up questions for Andrew in the RDC? David? Okay. Thank you. Charlie, any petitions or comments from citizens this evening? Thank you. Moving along under old business, first and only item under old business is second reading of ordinance 10C25. Christie?
Ordinance 10C25. This ordinance, if adopted, would vacate an alley right-of-way located north of Joe Street, east of Glenwood Alley, south of Beard Street, and west of North-South Alley between Cycle Avenue and Bryant Street, known as Tanglewood Alley, in Wright and Amiss subdivision of City of Huntington, Huntington County, Indiana. This is from Huntington Mobile Estates for a right-of-way. It's the second reading.
Thank you. Is there a motion to bring ordinance 10C25 to the floor for second reading and final adoption?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and second. Further discussion and consideration of the matter by council members. Not seeing or hearing any at this time, we'll call the question in favor of approval on second and final reading of ordinance 10C25. Christie?
Felton?
Yes.
Funk?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Rensberger?
Yes.
Brottigam?
Yes.
Chapman?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving along to new business. We have first and final reading of Resolution 1R25. Christie?
Resolution 1R25, this resolution, if adopted, would provide the company with a property tax abatement for a number of years as determined by council for the installation of new manufacturing equipment, new research and development equipment, new logistical equipment, or new informational technology equipment as described in the company's statement of benefits personal property. This is for Incipio for new manufacturing equipment, for a 5-year abatement or tax phase-in. Year 1 would be 100% exempt, year 2, 100% exempt, year 3, 100% exempt, year 4, 75%, and year 5, 50% exempt, and then year 6, it would be complete. And we have Kendall Mickley and Mark here.
So is there a motion to bring Resolution 1R25 to the floor for consideration?
So move.
Second.
A motion and second, and as Christie mentioned, we have Kendall Mickley on behalf of Incipio Devices and Mark Wickersham on behalf of HQ. Like to share anything about the proposal in front of council?
Thank you for your consideration this evening, and a special thanks to Incipio Devices for their continued investment in our community. For those who may not be familiar with the company, and Kendall obviously can do this better than I can, the company is in the orthopedic device and medical surgical instruments world. The proposal that's before you tonight discloses their current headcount at 168 employees, with the project itself creating an additional 4 more positions, supported by a salary of $208,000 in addition to their normal investments. Just by a review and way of background about tax abatement itself, or tax phase-in, as it's often called. This is a program that was first enacted in Indiana in 1977 as a tool to encourage economic growth. It has 3 very elementary, fundamental things that I think are important to remind ourselves as we consider the tool that the state's created. Assumption number 1 is that communities, in fact, desire and benefit from growth in the industrial sector. Fundamental assumption number 2 is that successful employers become community assets, and it's especially so when the company is locally owned and was the creation of a local resident in the first place. And the third thing is that there are lost opportunity costs occasionally that we need to not ignore should we not be willing to work with a project. And so, in addition then, it's like the phase-in, as you know, is not an entitlement program. These are considered incentives, not rewards. The company has not purchased the equipment yet. The only way to really lose is if the company chooses not to make the investment. Next, it's like the tax liability that they currently have will not be affected in any way by the discussion tonight. Tonight's discussion is only about additional investment opportunities as it relates to taxation. And finally, annual compliance is required of any company that's approved for this type of benefit. So that on an annual basis, while the abatement is in effect, you get an annual report on their progress publicly.
No, it's wrapping up my second year there. It's been exciting. Again, as Mark mentioned, locally owned is important. It's been fun. It's much better than the corporate life for sure. And it's exciting to see somebody that invested in Huntington be successful. So I've enjoyed it. So I appreciate your consideration.
Council members, any questions or discussion regarding 1R25?
I just want to thank Kendall for showing up. Usually on these tax abatements, nobody shows up, but you guys are doing a phenomenal job out there. We appreciate you. We love you, and it's just great to have local people running a local business and really caring about Huntington. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Kendall, is this increasing production for existing products, or are you going to be entering new markets?
This was our best guess of where we think we're going to be by the end of next year. Again, we did something similar 2 years ago. We actually filed that one, I think, $3.2 million. We ended up making about a $2.6 million investment. A couple of those pieces of equipment, we just didn't get it in the timing. So those I've added.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, we don't know what's going on with the tariffs with China, so those are some of the anticipations. We could explode really quick.
Good. Thank you.
Further questions or comment by council members? Okay, not hearing any further discussion, we'll call the question in favor of Resolution 1R25 on first and final reading. Christie?
Funk,
Yes.
Johnson,
Abstain.
Rensberger,
Yes.
Brodigan,
Yes.
Chapman,
Yes.
Felton.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving along on the agenda then, under miscellaneous, the next item we have is a downtown redevelopment proposal and presentation for council this evening. This is not a matter for council to take action on this evening, but we are looking for direction and a green light to proceed with bringing back a specific ask to council at a later meeting. In 2021, I was invited to go with Steve Kimmel and Matt Ditzler to Van Wert, Ohio, and while we were there, we learned about a process they were working through with their local community foundation and a land trust and working with a group called PAYGO USA. And what they were doing was trying to address a common plight in many communities, such as Van Wert, Huntington, and many others, where your downtown building stock is either owned by out-of-town investors that extract wealth from the community, or the local ownership may be undercapitalized to be able to maintain historic structures, or even if they are capitalized well, they're not able to use economies of scale because of narrow storefronts or things that weren't built to ADA access. And so it was an idea that stuck with us. We began taking some steps and trying to figure out what that would look like. Matt Ditzler's here to share about some of how the community foundation's been involved with that. But then last August and November, reconnected with Eric Doden, who's going to present to us tonight on behalf of PAYGO USA, and we brought in a number of folks from the community to push and pull and prod on this idea and see whether or not this was something worth Huntington considering. And so we have some of those folks here this evening to share with you. They'll introduce themselves and share why they think this matters for us. But ultimately, this is an opportunity, I think, and council has a letter from me that I think is an opportunity for us to support publicly in this private venture investment in downtown, which would help us to have a well-capitalized land trust that actually is able to redevelop and take care of our historic building stock and help preserve those buildings and bring them back to full utilization and capacity. And so one key distinction I want to make on this is if council decides to proceed with this, the city would not be the owner of this building stock. This would be a private, local entity, nonprofit entity that would be the holder of that building stock. The city's opportunity is to help capitalize up front through a potential loan for the venture, but the finer tuning of that will come at a later date. So with that, I want to invite Marge and Ryan and Sonia and Jim and Matt to come up and introduce themselves to council, share a little bit about why they think this matters. And these are potential ambassadors and board members of that nonprofit that was just mentioned. So I invite you to come forward at this time and introduce yourselves to the few folks who don't know who you are. And they all knew they were going to get this moment to speak, so.
Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. Good evening. First of all, I appreciate you volunteering your time for the betterment of the city. Not a lot of people are willing to do that. The mayor called me last summer, I don't know, it's been a while, to come listen to an idea that was out there. Having been the president of the Bippa State Bank for 32 years and been involved in the city for 40-some years, I have seen many a project come and go, many an idea of how to improve downtown, what to do about a building, what to do with a parking spot or a blighted. Many opportunities came and many opportunities left because so many people own buildings downtown for a variety of different reasons. And all those reasons are fine in their own idea, but they don't necessarily mesh together to make a downtown cohesive vision for what downtown could be. This is the best idea that I have ever seen for how that vision can come together and coalesce around a solid idea. So I would certainly urge you this evening to listen to what Eric has to say and as he presents this plan. By the way, I am no longer the president of the Bippa State Bank. I'm the chairman, so just making that plainly clear.
That was 3 sentences? That's what he said. You only have to say 3 sentences. My name's Marge Heiner. My husband and I owned and operated a business in Huntington for 32 years. And owning your own business in Huntington, there was so many people, employees from Huntington that took care of us. There was a lot of businesses in Huntington that we provided services for. And still today, the one problem is housing for some of those employees. And as Huntington grows, the housing also needs to grow. You also know in Huntington that there's a lot of negativism sometimes whenever you bring up a new idea. For example, the Boys and Girls Club, we should never build a new one. They've added on twice. YMCA should never have left downtown. They've now outgrown themselves and they really need to expand. Huntington University almost didn't build a science building, but at the last moment, the dear Lord intervened and it happened, and they've been booming with students ever since. But this is a very vital presentation that we listened to, and I would fully support it 100%. And that's why I'm here this evening, and I ask that you also consider it as a viable option. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Sonia Foraker. I am with Parkview Huntington Hospital. I have lived in this community all my life. I have dedicated 37 years to Parkview. Been able to see lots of changes within our organization, a lot of impact that the hospital makes in our community, and the need for the healthcare services. I also see the need, as Marge talked about housing, I see the need for our community to come together and really invest in our downtown. When I heard the presentation, I was very excited to be chosen to hear it. I was very chosen when Marge called and considered me as an investor in this process. So I would love to invest my time. I would love to see us move forward with because I also get to assist in my daughter and soon-to-be son-in-law's business on the weekends. And I get to see the different people travel to our restaurant. We have as far as Logansport, we see Bluffton, we see Wabash a lot coming in. So if we could improve the downtown area, improve additional buildings that they could visit while they're here, I think that would definitely
So my name's Jim Scheiber. I've been a financial advisor in Huntington for 27 years, also a lifetime resident. I planted the flowers downtown for at least the last 15 years, so I do have a vested interest in making the downtown look nice. If you visited some of the surrounding communities, and seen what they've done with their downtown, our downtown is got a little bit of work to do. I mean, it's got a lot of good things going for it, but there's always room for improvement, and this is an opportunity to bring some outside dollars to the community and also bring some outside expertise. So I'm really excited about the project also.
Hi, Matt Ditzler with the Community Foundation. Born and raised here in Huntington County, live just outside the city. Been with the Community Foundation since 2013, but the executive director since 2020. As Richard mentioned, I was able to go with him and Steve Kimmel to Van Wert and see this firsthand a few years ago, and we have been working alongside others at the Community Foundation to get ready for this type of opportunity. We're excited to be part of the downtown master planning process and some of the other things that have been going on downtown with Main Street and some other programming things. And so just excited about the presentation tonight and taking this next step forward with this process. The Community Foundation is supportive of this, both financially, and we are looking at also a capital investment as well in this process.
And so at this time, Council, I want to introduce Eric Doden, who's here with us in person, and one of his colleagues, Eric Shields, is joining us remotely. They're going to walk us through a presentation that those members that you just heard from of our community sat through in the fall and asked those difficult questions of. And of course, we're going to invite council to do the same here. And so with that, Eric, welcome to Huntington, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you guys hear me okay? It's a real privilege to be here tonight. I just want to tell you, when you come here, there's so many great things about Huntington that I love. Your location is phenomenal. You have a treasure trove of historic buildings, absolute treasure trove. I hope you value them as much as we do when we come in. And I would also say that, you know, being a university city is a very big benefit. So I think there's a lot of things we can build off. What I'm going to do is spend about 5 minutes just giving you a little bit of the background on how we got here, and then 10 minutes on the presentation. Then we'll do Q&A to your heart's content, and we'll go from there. So I grew up in small town, Butler and Auburn, if you guys are familiar with those two communities, two-town kid. And in the 70s, when I was growing up, we began to see the decline of the downtown, and you could physically see it happen. When I was 18 in 1988, I went to Hillsdale College in Michigan. If you guys are familiar with Hillsdale, Hillsdale's another small town that we began to see the decline. And I was told as a very young kid that, hey, the only way out is for you to go to college, get a job, and go to the big city. That was the way out. It was never the way back. And so that's what we accepted, right? That was the message that we heard. That's what we thought we had to do. So I go to college, I go get my law degree at Valparaiso, and I meet this guy named John Costas. And John Costas eventually becomes the mayor of Valparaiso, and when I'm starting to raise kids with my wife, Macy, we have 5, so we had a lot of kid raising to do. We would go back through Valparaiso every 90 days over about a 10-year period from 2001 to 2010, and we began to see a transformation of their community in ways that I had never imagined could occur. And as a business guy, I've been running businesses my whole career, I began to realize that we could use our business skills not just to make money in business, but to transform communities. And so over the last 15 years, I've spent my life, and specifically over the last 7, trying to figure out how we take some of the tools that we were using in big cities and in neighborhoods in big cities to how can we take those to small towns. And this presentation is really about 15 years worth of work condensed into 10 minutes. So if I'm throwing a lot of numbers and ideas at you, forgive me. We're trying to consolidate a lot of information, and then hopefully with Q&A we can answer any questions that you may have. So this is the team that we've put together. Pego USA has a group of dedicated people that help with the acquisition process, also help with other things that need to do with grant writing, that type of thing. Model Group has a long history and over the Rhine of restoring buildings to Class A standards. As you guys can imagine, taking a historic building from where it is today to being a modern HVAC, modern elevators, modern ADA compliant, life safety, that takes a lot of background and history in getting that done. And so Model Group has not only helped us with that, but they also are tax credit experts. And we'll go through that here in a minute. So what we're going to do is give you the small town challenge that we've seen PAYGO's model, how it's a little different than the normal model development, we're going to go through a case study, give you an analysis of the opportunity, some financing, how it works once you own the buildings, and then the benefits, and then do Q&A. So the challenge that we've seen, the mayor's already alluded to this, is absentee ownership, deteriorating buildings. That leads to lack of community pride, population decline, and declining opportunities. Let me tell you, we've studied numerous cities all over Indiana and Ohio and Michigan. And what we can tell you, in an average town of 10,500 people, they have somewhere between 120 and 160 buildings, somewhere in that neighborhood of historic assets. 80% of those are either underutilized or falling down. That is the average. So the average also is around 800,000 square foot. 80% of that square footage is underutilized or falling down. So this program begins to address that issue through our community trust model. So the solution is to acquire the properties, restore them, manage them, and create more opportunities, small business growth. Just big picture, about 75% of what we restore is housing, and then 25% is a mix of office, retail, and restaurant space. One of the unique ways that we do this is we return control to local leaders. So one of the things that can happen is about 20% of your building stock on average is owned by people out of town that may or may not have a vision for your community. And then other people find themselves to be undercapitalized. That is, they bought a building for $50,000 to $75,000 or $100,000, thought that they could restore it, and then realized that the cost of restoration on average for a building is about $2.5 million. And when you're done with the restoration process, the building on an income basis is only worth $1 million. Well, there's not very many people that can afford to make a $1.5 million donation to any community. And so they run out of energy because they realize that this isn't going to work financially. We revitalize and grow your core assets, and then we leverage tax credits that currently go to large cities. And we'll explain that here in a minute. The normal model development, I want to be very direct about this. There's 3 ways developers make money. One is a development fee. So, we spend about 2 years putting a deal together. You generally make about 5% in a development fee. 2 is the general GC fee, 3.5% to 5% in a GC fee. If you perform the GC work, some developers do, some of those hire that out with a different firm. But those are 2 ways that they make money. But the third way is called the promote. And what that is in simple terms is you build a building for $20 million, you sell it for $30 million, and they generally get anywhere from 50 to 80% of that profit. And that is the primary way that developers build wealth. What we've done, especially when we're looking at federal and state tax credits, and this is what statewide leaders like and federal leaders like, is we've taken all that profit, what we call the promote, and put it back to the community. So now developers under our model are simply fee for service. They get their development fee and GC fee, but all the profit goes back to the community trust, to the foundation on behalf of the community. And that is a big difference to our model versus the typical model where the developer comes in and buys the building, they own it, you give the tax credits to the developer, they restore the building, and then they flip the building in about 7 years for a profit. And, I had a statewide leader the other day say, well, Eric, it sounds like that you might be against people making money. I said, not at all. But what I do not like is when we give state and federal incentives or local incentives, and they're able to build a building for $20 million and sell it for $30 million, but they're using $20 million of our incentives to do that. I don't think that's appropriate. That is not free market at that stage. They're using incentives, and he goes, that is a very good point. I said, if they want to come in and with their own debt and equity with no help from state or federal or local, then that's fair game. But as soon as you include those incentives, we believe that the model should be that those profits go back to the community through a trust company. Now, the other benefit of the trust company that I want to point out before I go on is that when you're a trust company, in this state, we have over $200 billion, and I'm going to repeat that because it's hard to believe. We have over $200 billion of foundation money in this state. 200 billion with a B. So when you're a trust company, a 501c3, not only can you pay off your debt and equity that we're going to talk about here in a minute with the cash flow from the project when you lease it out, but you also can then apply for grants because all these large foundations have to give away a certain amount of money every year. And so because you're a trust company and a 501c3, you're able to not just pay off your debt and equity with cash flow, but with also grants that you can apply for every year. And so it's a really exciting model. This is why a lot of our financial minds that we've surrounded ourselves with are so excited about the model, because it's not making a developer rich, it's making you as a community wealthy. And that gives you a lot more flexibility. So the first 18 to 24 months is property acquisition. One of the hardest things we're going to do is acquire the properties. It's I call it patient persistence. There's a lot of emotion around that. Sometimes it takes people a couple months or maybe even a year to come to the conclusion that they're ready to sell. Oftentimes what we find is that the person that you're talking to initially is not ready to sell, but when the spouse gets the offer, they are very ready to sell. And so that often enters into the equation. But 18 to 24 months to do that. Then once you own a certain number of buildings, it's about a 12 to 18 month process to design what you're actually going to do with the buildings. You don't really know how to design it until you own it. Because if you have 10 buildings in a row, that's a different design process than if you have 5 and then you don't own the middle building and you have 4 more. So once you know what buildings you own, you design it, and then you begin to apply for the tax credits. And then from there, it's about once you close, so there's actually an official closing. You'll have a closing of the project where everyone puts their money in at the same time. So let's say we have a $50 million project to fix 20 buildings. You'll close that. The timetable of construction from that is about 18 months. So what's very cool in this process is within generally 4 years, you're delivering buildings for the community. And then the next step is property management. So because you're now at scale, you have enough square footage, you can now hire professional property managers that come in and help you lease the apartments and lease the commercial and retail and restaurant space. And then we call the last the party planning. And let me assure you, my kids and my wife will tell you that I'm not a party planner, so this is all on you guys. But what you have to do when you fix and restore your community is throw great events, as many times as you can to drive traffic to your community that they'll spend money and be a part of your community. And so that's what we say is the event planning. Van Wert, Ohio is our case study. They had about 10,000 people in their community, 10,500. They had 118 core properties. We purchased 53 in 24 months. The average square footage was 6,612 square foot per building. We were able to pay about just under $10 a square foot, so that tells you how distressed that these buildings were. And so the average price of the building was $64,861. And we invested about $3.4 million to buy 53 buildings. Today, by the way, they own 64 buildings. This is the timeline. We like to show this of how long it took us to buy the 53 buildings. You can see there's a big bump initially, where you had about 10 people that were really wanting to get out of their buildings, but mostly it's about 2 to 3 a month. And it's a very, arduous process to get there. Phase 1, we completed in Q2 of 2024, was a $26 million project to restore 11 buildings. It produced 36 residential units, 34,000 square foot of commercial space, and out of the 26 million, the local debt and equity was 11.8. So what that tells you is that we got about $15 million of tax incentives from federal and state government. And let me tell you guys, they were excited to help. When they see a small town like Huntington come to the table owning that many buildings, you know what they don't say to you? No. They say, how can we support? How can we help? What can we do to help? Phase 2 is under construction right now, is a $20 million project, 35,000 square foot, 8 buildings, 15 revenue producing units, 20,000 square foot of commercial space. And again, 7.2 million of it was local debt and equity, 13 million of it came from outside the community. So you can do the math. Out of 48 million, you have substantial amount of money from day one that's coming from outside the community to help you restore your community. And that's what makes this model so powerful. If we do nothing in Huntington, Right now, we're slated to lose population by 8.4%. And what that means is that your workforce is decreasing. You're going to have more difficulty with, businesses making money. We have to change what we're doing to change that outcome, and that's what this does. We're not going to go over the census numbers. We're just going to go right to downtown Huntington. This is kind of the area that we as a group, in meeting with leaders, kind of looking at focusing on. In that area that we've identified 136 buildings, 2.1 million square foot. The assessed value is 22.7 million. And so we are looking at like how many of those buildings do we want to purchase for the trust company. And people ask me all the time, well, how many would you purchase? As many of them as I could afford. That's the mindset with which I go into a project, because we want 100% restoration. That is the mindset that we bring to the table. I don't know about you guys, but I want nothing more than winning Super Bowls every day of my life. And excellence is the strategy that we have. Now, having said that, we're going to have to make a business decision about, based on how much money that we have from the people that capitalize the trust company, how many can we afford and what price point are people willing to sell their buildings for and that type of thing. Let me take you real quick through the capital stack and then we'll go to Q&A. So once we own these properties, let's say that we own 65 properties like Ohio, we try to fix about 20 at a time. It's a $50 million project to fix 20 buildings. Here's the simple capital stack. You get $10 million from National Historic Tax Credits. That's a federal program by right. And so you apply for that program, you get 20% of the project, so that's $10 million. You get $10 million from New Market Tax Credits. That is what I call a classic beauty contest. You have to earn those. That is an arduous process, one that I enjoy the least, but it is a significant amount of capital if you can win that. And then $10 million from a state tax credit. Usually we use the regional development tax credit or something along those lines. We have had some state leaders propose that the idea of a statewide approach for small towns specifically called STOY, and we're in contact with them on that. And they are excited about that opportunity. We've had a lot of positive from the General Assembly on doing something specific for small towns. And then you have $10 million from a bank, and then $10 million of what we call patient capital that you generally acquire from these foundations or grants. So some of them could be grants, others might be a patient capital from the foundation, and that's what gets paid off over time with the cash flows from the buildings as you restore them. We also are working on some funds that we can talk about later, a statewide fund that we have a partnership with Sagamore that are looking at raising a $300 million fund statewide that would also be part of the capital that could be used in this, and I'll get into that at a later time, maybe in a private meeting. So with that, what I'd like to do is just go to Q&A. Thank you guys I tried to shove a lot of information, I threw a lot of numbers at you. But would be happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding how we're doing this.
Questions by council members or discussion generally?
Yes.
So you're doing all the work to get us the government grants and all that stuff. You guys have the cash, but you're also taking investors for this, is that correct?
Yeah, so we generally bring as many people as we can together. So what we've seen are local foundations. We've seen high net worth families come. We also are working on a statewide fund. So we're bringing a combination of actors. We did $48 million in Van Wert with no partnership with the city. I never met the mayor of Van Wert, Ohio. So the fact that we have, city officials that care about this really helps this out, because when you're going to apply to these big national foundations, they want to see a partnership. They want to see that everyone's at the table working together. And so when we go to apply for some of these big grants that we might be eligible for, they want to see that it wasn't just Eric Doden and a couple high net worth families. They want to see that Huntington and the foundation and the city and the county and all these people came together. That's what they're looking for. And the more that we can pull that team together, the better. So that's why we bring a whole group of people together on these projects.
And then anybody that invested in it after it's done, are they getting a cut back?
Yeah, so they generally lend the money at 5%.
Okay.
We ask them for the first 5 years while we're buying the property to accrue the interest. So that is our request. Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes we have to find a clever way to pay them when they loan us the money, but mostly they'll accrue it. So what happens is, and we ask for simple interest, not compounded. So we generally ask for a 5-year loan at 5% interest. We've had some foundations come in at 4%. We've had some foundations even, think lower. But some, they want to kind of match the bond market on their portfolio. But what they've also realized is we're not taking money and giving it. We're taking money out of stocks and bonds on Wall Street.
And building.
And getting the same investment, but now we're building our Main Street.
Right.
And that's what gets them excited about being a part of this, because look, let's be honest, we give Wall Street money at 5%, they're making 20% on our money.
Yeah.
But they're not investing it back in Huntington.
Right.
That's the way that game works.
Question about tax credits. So in the current environment, are tax credits a stable thing going forward, statewide and also federal?
I think it's a great question. Here's my approach to that. Yes, until I know otherwise.
Okay.
Because what a tax credit is all private money. What basically the government is saying, both federal and state, is if you'll invest in Huntington, then we'll give you a tax deduction. That's what it is. All that $50 million is private money. But they're basically saying, if you give money to Huntington, we'll give you a tax deduction. Well, I don't know about you, but when I'm paying my taxes, I'd rather pay them to Huntington, to the federal government. I mean, it's just, I don't know, that's how I'm wired.
Right.
Because I know where that money's going, and I know it's benefiting people I love. And so that's the thing that I always help people understand about tax credits. This is not government money. This is simply saying, the government's saying that if you'll invest in certain projects that we believe in, that we think will help people, we will give you a tax deduction for that, and that's how that works. So far, we have heard more positives from the federal government and state government than negatives about this program specifically. In fact, there even is some talk in expanding it for small towns. And I don't want to get too much into politics, but let's just say that if you're following politics, small towns are a big part of who's winning elections these days. So I think it's going to be not just good policy, but good politics for these people to be supportive long term.
I have a second question.
Yes, sir.
So Van Wert case study, you mentioned population decline if we don't follow this model. Is Van Wert seeing stabilizing population or increases yet?
Yeah, so I would say that it's too early to tell.
Too early?
But 100% of their apartments are filled, and anecdotally, I can tell you that some of those people have come from other cities.
Okay.
And so what we've seen, especially on the residential side, is a very quick fill up. Now, you got to be careful with that too, because they underpriced their apartments. But they're now repricing them, and they're still getting them full. So we really encourage them. They're at 95 cents a square foot. We recommended they be at $1.50 a square foot, and they were just nervous. And now they're like, okay, we've left a lot of money on the table. Let's not do that again. And so we're seeing very, very quick fill up on the apartment side. What's been harder, because we have to re-engage and reinvent this, is the commercial and specifically the restaurant side. First of all, if you know anything about the restaurant business, it's tough business right now. But also, we haven't had, a cluster of restaurants, because what most people in the restaurant business will tell you is that when you have a cluster of restaurants, everyone benefits. But getting that, in place so that you then drive more traffic into your community is a much harder thing that we have to reinvent. We call it curating. So it's hard work. I mean, I will not mince words here. This will be some of the hardest work you'll ever do in your life for the next 10 years, and some of the most rewarding. I'll give you an example of my personal life, Electric Works. It took me 7 years to put that deal together. If you guys know anything about that deal, it's a $280 million project, one of the largest adaptive reuses in the United States. 7 years of my life. In fact, it got so bad, my wife banned the word Electric Works from our house because they heard it so many times. We still joke about it to this day. There were days that I wanted to give up on that project because it was so hard. But today, now seeing it done, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not grateful that we kept plugging away. But it will be hard work. This is not easy stuff, but it's rewarding work, and it's worth doing.
So Eric, you'll have a board for oversight. You start acquiring properties, so then you have to acquire a property manager to decide what to do with the buildings? Who decides what happens to what buildings?
Yeah, so that's where your board of managers will also be engaged with the right architects and engineering firms who will come in. They'll do if they do it the way that I've seen it done, they'll do a total model of the building. They have some really cool, devices now that give them, every single nook and cranny of that building. They'll do that for every building and then begin to look at how do we, like one of the things we like to do, for example, is have elevators at the ends on a stack of, 10 buildings so that you get ADA compliance, but you don't have, millions of dollars of elevators in every building. So you're looking for cost savings, they're looking for maximum use of the facility, they're looking for, how to work even with city council, because sometimes we've had to get special ordinances to allow for housing in the back half of a first-story building. Because, you don't want to necessarily have too much retail or office space, so you want to, have some flexibility with the first floor, but you don't want, front-facing, residential. So there's all kinds of, creativity that goes into that process to determine what's the highest and best use of a building. And in some cases, the engineers come in and say, this building can't be saved. And that's when you got to look at not adaptive reuse, you look at, do we tear down and build new? So these are all the decisions that the board of managers will make with professionals. I'm not an architect, nor am I an engineer, so I do rely on these experts, but we have a whole group of people that they'll interview and choose from. And we're getting more all the time of people that are excited about, this historic preservation and adaptive reuse.
What
Now,
is this?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. What is this doing to, in Van Wert, when you guys go through and buy the buildings, whatever, is that shutting down the businesses completely that are in it currently? Or are they selling it and still operating?
Yeah, so what we've been able to do is actually they sell it and still operate. There's a period of time where we have to go in and acquire the tax credits and design the building. But there's also, we've been able to phase it. So you fix these 20 buildings over here, then you're able to look at, we had one bridal shop, for example, that was at the corner in Van Wert. She really didn't want to move, but she knew she had to move at least temporarily to get that space fixed. Well, when she saw the new space that was a block down, she got so excited, she just moved permanently. So we often are working all the time with our local retailers, our local restaurant owners. A lot of them realize they don't want to own the buildings anymore. What happens to them many times is they forget about the second, third, and fourth story, and then they have a water issue or a roof issue, and all of a sudden they have a huge expense that they're not planning for in their capital budgets. And so they would rather be a tenant, but they don't necessarily want the hassles of owning a historic building that needs to be restored. And so we just work with them very closely to make sure that their needs are met, and then we try to, make their life as easy as possible, and that's always, as you can imagine, a negotiation all the way around. But we found really creative ways to manage that process.
With that being said, what is the rental cost for retail space?
Well, and again, that's a negotiation. So what I love about this model, the trust company doesn't have to maximize its profit. So let's say that they really want a certain kind of restaurant or a certain kind of retail shop. They may decide that, for that, we're going to have a lower rate, or we're going to do creative things like, hey, we're going to do this as a % of sales rather than an actual rate. And there's a lot of businesses that like % of sales because that way, their success is tied to the success of the business, or at least they know exactly what their rent rate is. So that's a business decision that the board of managers will make about, what the proper rate will be. And then obviously location matters. So, if you got a corner building, that's probably going to be a little higher rate. If you got a building in the middle, that's generally a little lower rate. Those are all decisions that will have to be made as well. And you're always balancing, the profitability of the trust company, because this is a nonprofit business with the needs of the community. And that's what I like about this model, is that's a better balance than just trying to make the most money possible. When you're dealing with a developer that owns a building, what are they trying to do in 7 years? Flip it for the what? Biggest profit they can make. That means that they're going to charge as high of rents as possible regardless of the situation. This trust model gives you a lot more flexibility with that.
How many of these have you done, and what kind of success have you had with the other ones Is Van Wert the first one?
Van Wert is the first.
Okay.
We're acquisition of property now in Hillsdale. I think it's about 180 square foot that's now in the process of being designed. And then we are in, right now, about 6 cities in Indiana. So the first thing we had to do in this process is prove that we could actually do it. And now that they've seen that we can do it, now it's time to get busy and scale it. Our stated goal and objective, and I make no apologies for this, we want to restore 85 county seats in the next 20 years. And I'm going to work my tail off to develop competitors to me that will begin to help scale this up. But selfishly, I want places like Huntington to be first and best. You know, the old adage in marketing is either you're first or best. It's nice to be both. So I have a real passion for this region and for our communities here. And but the project, let me put it this way: if we can pull this off in Van Wert, Ohio, we can pull it off anywhere. It's one of the toughest markets that you can pull it off in because of the distress of that community.
It's, yeah, I've been there. It's, yeah. I was there a few years ago, and I was trying to sell there, and it's tough.
Yeah. I think the first time, I mean, I'll just tell you this, my dad, I love my dad, but he was like, the first time we closed a $28 million project, I think he basically said to me, well, that's cute. And, and that's, because he's a small town guy, and he's like, a little bit like, I'm not sure about this. When we closed the second $20 million project, he calls me up and says, what in the world are you doing? Explain how you're doing this. So that's the kind of thing that's beginning to happen now, is you're beginning to attract these highly successful families who have grown up in small towns, who want to see their small town, restored, and they're getting engaged because they realize that, this is not just doable, but needs to be done.
Eric, there are 2 stories I picked up on over our conversations the last couple of years in the visit to Van Wert, and I'd like you to share those with council to underscore a couple things that I know for me were front of mind concerns. The first is share about the story in the public meeting or the public setting in Van Wert where you were sharing this with the community, and the gentleman talked about an out-of-town developer purchasing, and then I've got a follow-up to prompt you after that one.
Yes, we had a town hall meeting. I'm going to guess we had about 50 people in the room, and so I get done with explaining what we're going to do, and the gentleman raises his hand in the back and says, I don't want some rich developer out of Indianapolis coming up, buying up our town. And I started laughing. I said, well, first of all, I'm not from Indianapolis. I'm from Fort Wayne. Second of all, we can debate how rich I am. You can ask my wife, if she would like me to be richer. I said, but third of all, we're not buying up anything. You're owning yourself through your foundation. And it got real quiet, and it was game, set, match. They're so used to the old model where the developers coming in and literally buying up the town that they had not oriented themselves to this as a completely different model where the community owns itself through a trust and a foundation. And by the way, I use trust very intentionally, because when you say a trust, what does trust signify? Long-term, trustworthy, and it makes people ask the question, what's a trust? And that we want them to, as a trust is a 501c3 that all the profits go back to the benefit of the community. And it's a trust that holds things in perpetuity. So we suggest that when you do this model, that you never sell these buildings. If you own them and you fix them, you can make sure they're maintained. If you sell them, that doesn't, the new owners may or may not maintain them. So that's kind of why we use the word trust. What's your second?
So the second, Eric, oftentimes in a situation like this, the question that comes to mind is, well, what about somebody who's not ready to sell? There's a variety of reasons why a family or someone might not be able to. If I remember correctly, there was an ice cream shop in downtown Van Wert. You know the one I'm talking about?
Oh, I do.
Yeah, if you could share that.
Yeah, so this family, unfortunately, the father had owned this ice cream, had been a proprietor of this ice cream shop. He passed away suddenly, and they had locked the door when he passed away, and that became sort of the remembrance of their father. So you can imagine the emotions as you're approaching them. Hey, we want to buy your building and restore it. And it was just a very patient process, helping them go through the grieving process because, they had to grieve. And this was part of their grieving process, but then we began to help them understand how we were going to honor the legacy of their father through this process, and just got really creative with them. But, you know, this is what I call it. This is human. This is patience. This is persistence. Is being there for them, helping them through the process of their grief. We're not coming in here viewing them as an object or as something to, needs to get done. We're very human in this process. I think what we see people that own their buildings and don't want to sell is we view them as our partners. You know, if they're good building owners and they don't want to sell, we don't see them as competitors, we see them as partners, but they also see us as their exit strategy when they are ready to retire or sell. And that's when the partnerships really get formed, because they realize that we're not here to compete with you, we're actually going to, with the project we're doing, increase the value of your property, and they see then us as partners, and as when they're ready to move on, we become the natural person that they come to. The key to us is being able to close quickly and efficiently. If you can close in 30 days, then you're sending a message to people that that makes them see you as their preferred buyer.
Other question, comment by council members at this time? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it.
A couple quick things I want to reiterate again and just underscore to make sure we're clear on this. So as Eric just shared, one of the things I appreciate most about the strategy is it doesn't force out the current owners. It can be patient. Another thing I deeply appreciate is it's not ownership by city government. It is a nonprofit trust with board from the community. It allows us to harness economies of scale. And as much as we're talking about doing something new, the reality is we're using very conventional, standard financial tools and real estate development deals. We're just applying them in a smaller market. And so, Council, you have a letter from me. You've heard from members of our community. And what I would like is an indication from Council of if you're open to us bringing back a specific proposal, looking at an additional appropriation and looking to capitalize this with an initial loan from the city on this. And so we can bring that detail and answer further questions, but I would like guidance from council if you're open to that and would like to see something more specific and concrete.
Personally, I'd like to see this move forward, something that Ms. Heiner said. There's been many expansions in Huntington already, the YMCA, Huntington University, Parkview's grown. I think this is just a potential opportunity to see major growth in Huntington. I think it's what we need to do looking forward.
Also, I was in the HQ meeting this morning, and we had a couple people talking about some businesses. Oh, Mark was talking about, we have some businesses that were looking to come in here, but it's so hard to find housing for their employees. So if there's a lot of residential in this, it's going to help a lot as far as giving people be able to live in town and just drive to work instead of having to live in Fort Wayne or Roanoke or whatever else. They can find a place to, because the driving does wear on you after a while if you have to drive a long way to get to work. And I truly believe, since, first of all, how often do you ever see leader? I know all these guys, ladies and guys, and how often do you get to see all the leaders excited about something like that universally? Not very often. So when you've got people like that are ready to push something, and Marge, sorry I'm going to call you out, but when Marge wants something done, it gets done. I'm just saying, as a history of this in the town, I'm not kidding. So when you've got people like that are supporting something like this, I think it's a really good idea, and I'd like to at least see the next steps of it, presentation, see where we're at on it, and that type of thing. It sounds like a good thing, and I appreciate you coming to present. You have really good energy, very understandable. You don't use big words for me, thanks. But yeah, it looks like something that we could really get behind and help the city out. So.
One of the things that I like about it, been on council for a while, been in Huntington for a long time. The one thing that I think it does is add some cohesion and direction to downtown. For how many decades, everybody kind of does their own thing. Some succeed, some fail. But this kind of project brings some cohesion where things are done with some forethought. Somebody's managing it. and then having the organization taking over more and more buildings, I think is a good idea, because then there's a benefit for that group to make sure that things are taken care of, are maintained, are up to date, which is hard to do when you have what's happening now. And we've got a lot of great downtown businesses, and they do a great job. I like the idea that they're going to be your partner, they're going to be partners, but then somebody can come alongside them and fill in and around the edges. I think that's good.
I'd like to go next step as well. Particularly what Charlie said, I think having more comprehensive strategic thinking going on for downtown is really important. So.
Go ahead, Ned. I feel good about it because if you got people like this behind the program, I think it'll be a very, very successful deal and a wonderful opportunity for the community. I mean, we certainly need it. This kind of backing over here, these guys are all go-getters. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I'd be interested in seeing things, or at least get some sort of a official proposal at some other time. See what we're going to work with. I mean, between the city, the county, school corporation, local businesses, industry, like who doesn't want Huntington to grow? And this could be a real good shot in the arm. And oftentimes, like the best return on investment is the early investment. So if we can be, one of the early investors, it'd be something that I'd be willing to consider.
I think another thing I want to touch on before we call this quits is there, even in my lifetime, we've seen so much changes in downtown Huntington. I'm sure you guys have all seen massive changes. But kind of like Eric said, the changes that he had growing up in his hometown, now we have the opportunity to make those changes or see the massive growth that is potential with Huntington. I think it's definitely worth moving forward.
Thank you, Council, for the direction on that. We will get specifics to you for your consideration, and we'll continue to move this process forward with the local folks that are interested, as well as our hopefully future partners at PAYGO. One last note on this too, as far as the initial consulting fees on this, so far there is interest from Mr. Ditzler mentioned about the Community Foundation making an investment on that. We also have a private family foundation that is willing to underwrite a good chunk of those consulting fees up front as well, so that'll be detailed and laid out as well. So with that then, we'll close the discussion for this time. We'll bring a specific proposal back for Council's consideration. Appreciate your time and patience with it this evening. As you ponder this and chew on it, again, this is all in public meeting for a reason. So run the idea by folks and just be clear on what we're talking about, what we're not talking about, get more feedback. We've had that conversation already with about 50-some people in the community, and they all land right where Council did tonight. Like, this sounds good, let's take the next step. So with that then, last item on the agenda, Christy, monthly budget reports.
Yes, we ended May. We had $8,400,000 in general fund, $1.9 million in MBH, park fund, and airport $112,000. As far as seated, we spent $60,427 in May. Year to date, $420,000. And our balances are right on track for this time of year, and we will be receiving June settlement here in the next week or so. So I'll bring that back to you for the June 30th balances next month.
Any questions for Christy on the financial picture? Okay, last item for the good of the order is just, as Council's aware, is that with the changes at the State House that Dwight alluded to earlier, we have engaged Reedy Financial Services to do a deep dive on the financial impact for the city and other overlapping units of government, and those materials will then be brought to Council in the July meetings so that you have that information as we look out ahead at the next couple of years and what that impact will be for us, which again underscores all the more reason to make investments improving AV and attracting more people to our community. With that, then, is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.